uh, Discovering God's Miracles conference with our guest speaker, Dr. J.P. Moreland. I'm Steve Quinn. I'm the senior pastor at BACBC here, and I know there are many churches that are represented here. I was going through the registration list, and I go, yeah, but I might miss a church, so I won't say them all. but I appreciate all of you being here. We're honored that you'd want to participate in this, and we're trusting God to encourage and challenge each one of us and grow us in our faith. Dr. Moreland has a couple of his books in the back, and we just remind you we are only able to take cash or checks, and if you write a check to BACBC, that'll be fine. And the books are heavily discounted, so they'll beat Amazon. So encourage you to, if you don't have his books, those two books in particular, to avail yourself of them. Well, Dr. J.P. Moreland is a Christian apologist, theologian, and philosopher. He currently is Distinguished Professor of Philosophy at Talbot School of Theology at Biola University in La Mirada. He's also an author, as I mentioned, has written many books, conference speaker, church planter, and pastor. He has THM from Dallas Seminary, his PhD in philosophy from USC. But what I've got to know him just a little bit, he's a family man. He loves his wife, he loves his children, his grandchildren. He's a man who loves God. He's humble. He wants to be used by God, and he has been used by God for over 50 years to proclaim the message of Christ to all that will listen. And so we also want to let you know that he'll be speaking here tomorrow from 9 a.m. to noon. And then on Sunday, he'll be speaking in our Cantonese Mandarin service in English and translated on one message. And then he'll have a different message the second hour in our English worship service at 11:15. So you're all welcome to come to that too. So at this time, let me have a word of prayer, and then we will welcome Dr. Moreland. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for the joy of knowing that you created us. You desire us to love you with all our heart, soul, and mind. We pray that these hours that we have, learning about how powerful you are and how you're working in this world, will stir us and encourage us to again take a step further in loving you and knowing you and serving you with all our heart, soul, and mind. So we pray for Dr. Moreland that you'll give him strength, you'll give him the words that you want him, that will meet the needs here. We pray that we would have open and receptive hearts to your Spirit's leading and teaching. And we thank you for this time. In Jesus' name, amen. Let's welcome Dr. J.P. Moreland as he comes to share with us.
Good to see you. Well, thank you, brothers and sisters, for coming. I do not wear sunglasses, especially I don't wear them at night. But I had a very, very severe surgery about a month ago, all cancer surgery under my right cheek and around my eye, and so my eye is heavily swollen. And I thought that I would spare you the disgust of having to look at my right eye, so I'm wearing sunglasses so you'll be able to focus on what I'm saying and not on what I look like. That sound like a deal? Now, I'm going to be talking about miracles, and you may find it a bit odd that I did not get healed with my own situation. But as we'll see later, when we talk about miracles, it's a gross misunderstanding to think that because they're still happening and that we need to be more expectant, that we should think that miracles will happen in the majority of times. That is not the case, and we want to have a balanced Christian approach on this, which is something that I hope to give you this evening and tomorrow. So what I'm going to do tonight in this first hour is to give you some understanding of the subject of miracles in general that I think will be helpful to you. And then we'll take a look at one of the 5 types of miracles I'm going to talk about this weekend, and then we'll have a little time for Q&A. Now, Ken Galb was in 1935, he became a missionary, and he was a missionary for 50 years. He traveled 115 different foreign countries preaching the gospel. He wrote a number of articles in what used to be called Guidepost Magazine. And he spent 30 of those years taking his wife Barb and his 3 kids until they were full grown on bus tours where they would go to churches, they would sing and preach the gospel and hold evangelistic outreaches for the churches that would invite them. After having done this for a couple of decades, there was a period of time where Ken, by his own admission, just was burned out, and he began to become apathetic, not only toward his ministry, which he kept telling himself never made a difference to anybody's life anyway, which was not true, but that was his self-talk. And he was apathetic toward God. He just was at the point where he wanted to just get out of the ministry, go back to their office and their home in the state of Washington, get a job and get out from underneath the stress. And he was just kind of sour. And his family was aware of that. So they were on a trip, and they had their little family bus, and they were driving down Interstate 75 in Ohio. And the wife thought that they needed to do something to kind of lift their spirits. So she said, let's get some pizza. And the kids, yeah, let's get some pizza, the 3 children. And so they didn't know where a pizza place was. But lo and behold, the next exit, which was on the way, it was exit 741, south to Dayton, Ohio, there was a little town, and it said pizza and gas. So they got off and drove to this place just a few miles off the freeway. And lo and behold, it was kind of a dinky little place. There was a pizza shop, there was a filling station and a phone booth out on the road, on the main road, in front of the filling station, and there was a Dairy Queen. And then I guess further in, there were a few other little shops, but there were like 500 people who lived in this town. Well, Ken told his family, why don't you go ahead and get pizza? I just want to stay in the van for a bit and pray and think. I've got some things on my mind. And so they did. And he stayed there for a while. And as a result, he sort of got a little bit hungry. And he decided what he was going to do was go to a Dairy Queen and just get some ice cream. So he got out of the van, and he was walking past the phone booth and the filling station to get to the Dairy Queen. And the phone started ringing in the phone booth. And it rang 7, 8, 9, 10 to 12 times. And he walked past it, of course. Then he thought, I wonder if this is an emergency. I don't know, I'm going to pick it up. So he went back and he picked up the phone and said, hello. And the operator said, is this Ken Gaub? Now, he immediately thought that this was some kind of a spoof, like Candid Camera, if you remember that show. So he literally started looking around to see if there was anybody filming this. And he said, well, I'm Ken Gaub. And he heard a woman's voice on the other end of the line, a woman whose name turned out to be Millie. And she was from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And she told the operator, that's Ken Gaub. That's the guy I want to talk to. And so the operator said, if you're Ken Gaub, this person is calling for you. Would you talk to her? Yes. Well, to make a long story short, Millie, that day, in fact, that afternoon, had written a suicide note because she wanted to kill herself. Her life was so painful that she didn't want to live any longer. And as she was coming up to where she was going to do this, in her mind, she remembered seeing Ken Gaub speak on television. And she remembered that for some weird reason, his message touched her like nothing else had. And she remembered that. And she said, oh God, if I could just talk to Ken Gaub, I just desperately need to talk to him. And a series of numbers came to her mind. And she wrote them on a sheet of paper and dialed the number. And the number was the phone booth that Ken Gaub just happened to be walking past when the phone booth rang. And he was able to talk her down from committing suicide. He got her going back to church, and he said, I'm going to be back in my office in 3 weeks. We got 3 more weeks of this tour, and I want you to give me your number because I'm going to call you, and I want to touch base. So he began to touch base with her on a weekly basis, and she became healed and became an on-fire Christian from that point on. Now, I'd like to suggest to you that that was a miracle. That was an absolute miracle. There's really no other way to explain that. And if you just think about the circumstances and how unlikely it was that that would happen, I think we would have to say that that was definitely a miracle that God did. Now, I want to tell you another story, and this is a story that one of my physician friends told me. I was visiting with one of the doctors that I know, and I said, have you ever seen a miracle? And he said, oh my gosh, yeah. And I said, would you tell me about one? And he said, well, several years ago, when our daughter was in elementary school, I think she was 4th or 5th grade, we had a parakeet that she just loved this bird, and it was her pet. She played with it all the time. And her mother, my wife and I hated the bird because we had to clean the cage, and it made a mess, and we just didn't like the bird. So a few days after all this that I'm telling you about, they went in. Wife went in the morning, and the bird was dead in the bottom of the cage. And when the little girl got up, the parents were whoopee, but the little girl was obviously just crying and so sad. And so they decided that they would have a burial for the bird in the backyard. And before they did, the daughter said to my physician friend and his wife, I want another bird. And they said, honey, no, we're not going to get another bird. We had our bird for a good while. We need a little bit of a break from a bird. And she said, well, then I'm just going to ask Jesus to give me another parakeet. And I want one just like that one. Well, if you want to ask Jesus to do it, thinking that, of course, it won't happen, be my guest. So they buried the bird. I want to let you know that because what I'm going to tell you wasn't that bird. This is not a resurrection, though they're happening all over the world today in record numbers, just like in the book of Acts. People are literally being raised from the dead, and entire villages in the Muslim world are becoming Christians because of those resurrections. But this was on a weekend, and my physician friend went into his office on Monday. He gets a phone call from his wife about noon. She said, you are not going to believe what just happened. Their daughter was out in the backyard playing with 3 or 4 of her little friends. And all of a sudden, a parakeet that looked exactly like the one that died landed in this tree right where they were playing. And the little girl went up and she held her finger out, and this parakeet jumped on her finger. And her mother was washing the dishes, and she walks in and comes into the backyard and says to her mom, Jesus gave me a parakeet. And her mother didn't know whether to be glad or mad, but she was freaked out. And my doctor friend said there was no doubt about it that was an answer to a little girl's prayer and a miraculous event. Now, what I want to do now is I want to give you a little bit of a background about how these things happen, how you know when something's a miracle as opposed to a coincidence. And then I'm going to list 5 different kinds of miracles. I'll give you an illustration of each one, and then I'll talk a little bit about why they don't always happen. And then after a break, we'll come back and we'll start with the first kind of miracle. And then tomorrow morning, we're going to go over 3 other types. There's one type we won't have time to talk about. But I want to begin, before I tell you, how do you know when something's a miracle as opposed to just an unbelievable coincidence? And there's a clear way to know. But I want to say, first of all, that I don't care what your view is about spiritual gifts. There are different positions on that. I happen to be a person who believes in the so-called miraculous gifts of the Spirit. But if you don't, that doesn't matter to me, because my theological basis for what I'm going to share with you tonight and tomorrow morning is not based on gifts. So if you don't believe the supernatural gifts of the Spirit, if you're called a cessationist, is what that's called, if you believe that, then you don't need to leave, because I think that miracles should be expected more than we do because of the presence of the kingdom of God in a new form since Jesus came. Now, Jesus brought a new form of the kingdom, and if you read books on church history, for the first 4 centuries, miracles broke out like crazy. St. Augustine, one of the most brilliant men in the history of Western thought, documented 85 miracles in his parish. And he didn't believe in miracles at that time. He was a cessationist. He saw one with his own eyes. And if you look at church history, miracles have happened. Sometimes it's been in waves because of certain reasons that the church began to frown on miracles. But there has been an outbreak of miracles since 1970 all over the world. And today, something is happening that makes what happened in the book of Acts look like child's play. And this is documented by mission organization after mission organization. Something unbelievable is breaking out all over the world and including in this country. And my basis for that is, though the kingdom is not here in the form it will eventually be, it is still here in a form that was greater than before Jesus came, and it is to be manifested in power. And so I believe that an expectation of the miraculous, properly understood, is rooted in the now, not yet of the kingdom. It's now, but it isn't going to be what it will be. Not so much in spiritual gifts. Now, I think that there are 3 things that a believer in the book of Acts and in the early church were emphasized in building a well-rounded Christian. And any one of these 3 missing, and you just have the other 2, you're going to be in balance. And the first one is the cultivation of a Christian mind. We have to learn how to think like Christians. Most Christians who go to college lose their faith because they were told what to believe, not why. And so we need to learn what we believe and why we believe it. That's number 1, a Christian mind. Number 2, the cultivation of a tender inner heart and a Christ-like character through daily spiritual formation practices. Let me say that again. The cultivation of a tender heart and Christ-like character through daily spiritual formation practices, like memorization of Scripture and other sorts of things. I list 4 of these practices in the book I brought on anxiety and depression called Finding Quiet. They changed my life and helped me get rid of a debilitating anxiety. The third is an expectation of signs and wonders given the new form of the kingdom and the power of the Spirit. And those 3 are the 3 things that, if practiced in a church, will produce a balanced, vibrant church. So I am not a charismatic, I'm not a Pentecostal, I'm not against that. I'm what's called a third wave Christian. I believe there's one baptism of the Spirit when you're saved. I don't think speaking in tongues is a sign of anything. I don't personally speak in tongues, but I'm just giving you a little bit about who I am. Now, how do you tell the difference between a miracle And an incredibly unlikely coincidence, but it was a coincidence. And why does this matter? Well, here's why it matters. When you see a miracle happen, it really strengthens and builds your faith. And it helps you endure when God is not doing anything, apparently. And you're suffering and God seems to be distant. But if you see a miracle and you then start saying, well, you know, that could have been a coincidence. I don't really know it was a miracle. What that will do is it will take away the faith gain you got from seeing God's hand move. And it will undermine one of God's reasons for acting, namely to build your faith. So we need to learn how to tell when something is a miracle and when it isn't. Now, I'm going to give you a principle that has nothing to do with religion. It is actually a scientific principle. It was used, I think, about a year ago by anthropologists, where they discovered a Neanderthal cave, and there were drawings on the cave, and there were debates in the journals as to whether those were drawings by the Neanderthals or whether it was just formations on the cave that were natural. And there were people on both sides. This principle settled the issue, and they discovered that they were done intentionally by the Neanderthals. They weren't as a result of erosion and things like that. Now, if an event happens and it conforms to two principles, then you can know beyond any reasonable doubt that that event was done on purpose by a rational agent, a finite person or a divine person. And this is called the intelligent agent principle. Now, in the world, there are natural causes of things. If lightning splits a tree, the cause of that was a physical event, the flashing of the lightning. And to explain that, you tie that flashing by way of a law of nature to the splitting of the tree, and you have a model of force that is due to the electrons that constitute the lightning, and you give it a natural scientific explanation. Fair enough. But we all the time use another kind of explanation called a personal explanation. If I walk in and the dinner table is set in a certain way, I know that the law of nature didn't do that. That's to be explained by a person who had a motive for setting the table like that with a specific intention. And my wife set the table because we're having our Hispanic neighbors over and we're going to have Mexican food. So in a court of law, personal explanations are used to explain a person did it. And so we have the difference between a personal cause of something and a natural cause of something. And when two conditions are met in science, in forensic science, archaeology, anthropology, linguistics, in those branches of science, if two things are satisfied, you know the cause was a personal, rational agent. Number one, the event has to be highly improbable. It has to be highly improbable. Now, that is a necessary condition, but it's not sufficient. By alone, it's not enough. And here's an illustration. Suppose you and I sat down to play bridge, and suppose that we had $500 resting on the game. Whoever won the game won $500. And I'm the dealer, and I deal the cards, and lo and behold, on the very first deal, I get a perfect bridge hand. Now, was that done on purpose by a personal agent? Me. Did I cheat? Well, how likely is it that I would get a perfect bridge hand on the first deal? Very unlikely. But your hand is equally as unlikely as my hand, because we both got the same number of cards. So both of our hands have the same low probability. The difference is that there's nothing special about your hand besides the fact that it's the hand you got. In fact, the only way to describe your hand is some hand or other that you were dealt. That's it. My hand, however, has the second condition, and that is independent specialness. Independent specialness. If there's something special about the event, besides the fact that it happened, then that combination indicates that it was done by a person. In my case, what makes my hand special, independent of it being the hand I got, are the rules of bridge. Before we sat down, we would know anybody who gets that specific hand wins. Your hand isn't in the rule book. It doesn't matter. So it's the combination of my hand being unbelievably improbable plus it being very special among all the hands people could get that indicates beyond reasonable doubt that I cheated. Now, this principle was done in a court of law years ago. What happened was that there were local, state, congressional elections, and there were 8 districts that were holding elections, and there were literally 7 or 8 parties in each district that were running: the Green, the Peace Party, Democrat, Republican, and 2 or 3 other parties. Well, when the ballots were printed, the Republican candidate was listed number 1 in the ballots in all 8 districts, and the other 6 or 7 were randomly listed on the ballots. Now, the Democrats sued the person who made the ballots in court and won, and they used the intelligent agent principle to prove their case. They asked, first of all, what is the likelihood that one party is going to be first on all the 8 different ballots when that party is 1 out of 7 or 8 that could show up? And if you do the probabilities, it's highly, highly improbable. But so what? Improbable things happen all the time. The second factor is what got the Democrats won. And the person who printed the ballot was a Republican. And we know that whoever's listed first on the ballots gets more votes just by being first. So it was the specialness of that result to the ballot maker, plus its improbability, that made it beyond reasonable doubt that this was not a random result, it was something done specifically. Do you understand? Now, in 1972, I became a Christian in 68, and I joined Campus Crusade staff, and I was going back with a fellow to minister at the Colorado School of Mines in Golden, Colorado. And we were out at Arrowhead Springs at Crusade staff training, and as a new Christian, I heard a lecture on praying specifically. So I didn't tell my roommate. He had to go to Wyoming to raise support. I had mine raised. And I drove back to Colorado, but I wrote in my prayer journal, Lord, I would like for you to provide for Ray and me a white house with a white picket fence with a nice grassy front yard, maybe just around 2 miles from campus, and for no more than I think I asked for $120 a month. And this was back in 1970, 71 actually, 71, 72. This would have been the summer of 71. Well, I drove back, and I couldn't find anything in Golden. And finally, I found a 2-bedroom apartment 12 miles away in Denver. And I told the manager that we'd take it. It was $130 a month. And she said, call me this evening. Another couple was in here before you guys, and my roommate wasn't there anyway. And if they don't want it, you can move in tomorrow. So I called 5 o'clock. She said, I'm sorry, but this other couple was first, and they're going to take the apartment. I'm back to ground zero. I get a phone call that evening from a staff worker at the University of Denver named Kaylin Carr. And Kaylin says, Jay, are you looking for a place to live? Yes. Well, I don't know what you're looking for, But I was in at Denver Seminary today, and on their bulletin board, there's a pastor that has a place in Golden that he would like to rent to Christians. Would you like his number? Oh, yeah, give me his number. So I called this pastor. We arranged to meet at the place he wanted to rent at 9 o'clock the next morning. I drove up to a white house with a white picket fence, with a nice grassy front yard, 2.2 miles from campus, $110 a month. That was a specific answer to prayer. It was a miracle that was done by God. It was improbable, and it was independently special because what we found was exactly what I had earmarked in my prayer. And the combination of those two indicate that that was a supernatural event. Now, there are 5 different kinds of miracles, that at least that I have written about in the book, A Simple Guide to Experience Miracles. There are 5 different kinds, and I want to just illustrate these and speak about them. The first one would be a specific answer to prayer, where you pray for something specific, and it's unlikely, but it's specific and it happens. That is a miracle. I'll give you an illustration. A couple in our church, the Hendersons, have been a part of the church for 30 years. Wise, godly people. The wife, June, was raised by missionaries and came back to the States to go to college and met Bill, and they got married. Her parents worked among poor people in South and Central America and for a while over in Africa. And they were on the mission field for 3 decades, and they saved almost no money. And they were getting older, and they were just tired, and they wanted to retire back to the States. They could also be around grandkids. So they came back, and they moved into an apartment just north of San Diego. They lived in this apartment for 2.5 years. The wife taught public school, elementary school. The husband preached in and helped plant Hispanic churches for free, didn't make any income. So her income was all they had. And they had something like, I don't remember, $4,000 or $5,000 in savings that they had brought back. And the wife said to the family, to her husband and to her kids that lived there, including June and Bill, you know, I've spent my whole life living in huts and concrete slab homes, and I thank God for our apartment, but I would like to spend my latter years having a home of my own. It would mean a lot to me. I have these, I don't know, nest building instincts, and I just would like to have a place of our own. And so she asked her kids to start praying for her, and they did. And so she and her husband contacted a realtor, and they went house hunting. And they looked at 4 or 5 places, and June is telling me all about this, and they went to a 5th place, and it was empty. The people had already moved out, and so it was open. They went inside, and the wife just said, "This is it. I'm in love with this place. This is the house I want." And the real estate agent said, "Well, how much do you have to put down, and what kind of a monthly payment could you afford?" And they said, "Well, we have, I don't know, maybe $4,000 to put down, and you know, this is my salary." And the real estate agent said, "It really breaks my heart to tell you this, but you need 4 times, at least 4 or 5 times that much to get a bank to pay any attention to you to put down in this house, and you are way short of what you need for a monthly payment." And her heart was broken. And so they hadn't been there very long because the house was not furnished. So after about 30 minutes, they decided that it wasn't going to work. And they were getting ready to finish writing up something for the real estate agent. And there was a knock at the front door. And the real estate agent went to the door. And there were two men there with, coat and tie. No, they weren't Mormons. But they said to her, the real estate agent, are you the owner? No, but there's a couple here that, they're thinking about buying the house. Do you want to talk to them? And yes, could we please? And so the couple went forward and they said, we work with, I don't know the name of the cell phone tower company, but we have contacted a number of houses in this block, and nobody has been interested, but we would like to see if we could persuade you to let us put 2 cell phone towers in your backyard. If you'll let us do that, they'll look like palm trees. They won't be eyesores. And we will give you $10,000 down, and we will give you $10,000 a year for 30 years. Well, that was enough, because the house payment plus tax was $960 or $970, so they had enough to make their house payment. And the father just died about a year and a half ago, and they still were, the wife had died about 6 years ago, and they were still living in the house till they passed away. That was a miracle, because what are the odds of them being there right when those guys came along, and them giving them just what they needed to get in the house, and the bank was more than confident that they would be paying their bills, because the cell phone tower people were going to pay for that. So that's an example of a specific answer to prayer. You guys okay out there? You're kind of non-responsive, and I don't know if you're not enjoying this, or do you think I'm crazy? And my wife does. Okay. All right, so that's the first kind of prayer. Another kind of prayer is healing, divine, miraculous healing. And we're going to talk about that tomorrow morning. How do you pray for the sick effectively? And I will teach you about that and explain something about the biblical basis of healing and how to go about doing it and how to have the right expectations tomorrow. But let me give you a little example of a miraculous healing. This is contained in detail in my book on miracles, but I'm going to give you the guts of it. I go to a vineyard church, and it practices supernatural prayer and healing prayer. And I've been going there since 2003. And so back in the earlier years I was there, we had a prayer room on Monday night where people could come and bring somebody who needed healing prayer. There were about 20 volunteers and a person who would fill out a form. And then a group of 3 or 4 would take that person up to a small conference room and ask for permission to lay hands on the person and pray over them, soaking prayer for about 20 minutes or so. Well, there was a woman, and this took place in 2004, named Susan Simmergram. She was a Jewish woman who had just been told by her oncologist that they had done everything she could and she was incurable. She had 51 different places of cancer riddled throughout her body, growing, each node growing, and it was starting to cover her entire body, and they had tried chemo and everything, and nothing had stopped it. And so he said, I want you to go to hospice. That's the best place to be at this point. Well, one of her friends was a believer and knew about our prayer room and said, look, Susan, what do you have to lose? Why don't we just go and on a Monday night and let people pray over you? Well, she realized she didn't have anything to lose, and so she went, and on the first Monday night, absolutely nothing happened. But she felt so loved on, And one of the things I'll teach you tomorrow is what to tell people that they can expect and what not to tell them they can expect. But she felt so loved on that she wanted to go the next week. So she went the next Monday night. Same thing, nothing happened to her, but it got her out of hospice. It was a wonderful experience. She felt some kind of spirituality there. The third Monday night she went, and she began to feel an electric tingling and like hot oil pouring down. This is her own description, from the top of her head all the way down to the bottom of her feet, and she felt electrical movement inside of her body. And she told the prayer team, "I think I'm being healed right now." And they said to her, "Well, we're encouraged, but you need to go to your doctor." And so she called her oncologist and said, "I'll pay out of pocket, but," because she wasn't seeing him, "but I would like to get another scan. And I want you to fit me in this week." And he said, "I've got a slot. You can come in." Well, he took a scan of her, and he came out white as a ghost, and he had 2 plates in his hands. One was the scan that he had taken 3 to 6 months earlier, and this one, and there was she said to him, "Not only is there no sign of cancer anywhere, there is no evidence you ever had cancer." Now, he was afraid she would sue him, and so he insisted. He said, "Now listen, I know that we did it right the first time and you had cancer. Look at this plate." And you could see it all over her body. And he said, "That's cancer." You know what I mean? It's not that we'd misdiagnosed you. She was miraculously healed. She gave her life to Jesus Christ, and it never came back. Now, how do I know that? Well, in 2016, this would have been 8 years later, after this happened, I got a call from PBS, and they wanted me to be a part of a film they were doing with scholars from North America and Europe, atheists and believers in God, over the miraculous. Is there such a thing or not? And they wanted me to be a part of the show. So I agreed, and I decided I wanted to find out about Susan's miracle. Now, I had been told about it with 3 guys on the prayer team that I know, and I would trust their word like solid rock. I trust them. They're good men. Known them for 20-some years. But by that time, I'd known them a long time. All right. But I said, "Can you get me an email of her?" So one of the guys, Ken Slezak, got me her email address, and I emailed her. And I said, "This is what I heard happened to you back in 2004. Can you tell me if this is accurate, if there's stuff that is wrong? Because I just need to know the facts about this because I'm going to be on a television show." I got an email from her, and I've got it at home. I saved it. "Dr. Moreland, everything that you said is exactly what happened to me. I was instantaneously healed that third night, and my doctor cleared me of cancer later that week. And I became a Jesus follower, and to this day, I still am in love with Jesus. I attend a Messianic congregation, and for the last 8 years, I've had no cancer whatsoever anywhere in my body." That is a miraculous healing. And we see those kinds of things fairly regularly at our church. I would say we see something of this sort at least every other week. And there are reasons for that I can explain to you tomorrow. Third kind of miracle is when God speaks to someone outside the Bible, but not in contradiction to the Bible. And tomorrow I'm going to share with you 5 different ways God speaks to people, and I'll illustrate each one of them. But let me be clear about this. I do not believe that God will say anything that contradicts His written word, and God is not giving new doctrinal or ethical revelation. But he does still speak to people. And I'll give you just a very simple example. I'm going to tell you one tomorrow that's probably going to blow your mind. And it still blows my mind. But back in July 6th, 2007, to the next day, we had a worship conference at our church, and there were pastors and people from all over the western part of the United States. And we had about 3,500 people at the conference. And a friend of mine who was a pastor told me that he was going to be there. And I hadn't seen him in a long time. He lived in a different part of the country. And so my wife and I went in, and the place was just packed. We got there a half hour early, and we sat in a place we typically do. And this pastor friend saw me come in, and he was sitting up in the back. We were kind of down in the front, and he came up and he tapped me on the shoulder. Hey, JP, hey, man, I'm here. And we just gave each other a great big old hug. And I said, I am so glad to see you. Let's see if we could at least chat after the conference, and if we could find each other. And he said, yeah, let's look for each other. I said, so great. So the conference went on. There was a ton of worship and some teaching. And then afterward, our pastor said, now, we have a ministry team that's been trained to pray for the sick. If there's anybody who would like to receive prayer, I want you to please feel free to come down. And probably 400 people went forward. And we have 75 people at that time on our prayer team that were allowed to pray for the sick because they'd had some training. And I happened to notice, because I sit on the aisle, because at my age I have to get up and go to the bathroom, and so he says, yeah, that's easy for you to say. Okay, but so I saw him go down front. Well, so I decided, I don't know if I was prompted or if I decided, but I got up and I went down behind him. And he got down on his knees in front of this elevated platform, and he was just like this, and I put my hand on his shoulder. And it came to me, tell him I see him, tell him that I approve of his ministry. Now, I don't talk that way. I don't typically say that God sees you. I typically say God is aware of you, or God knows where you are. He's aware of your presence. I certainly don't say God approves of your ministry. I would say something like, God really loves your ministry, or he's proud of you. But I don't know if I've ever used the word approved of. That's just not the way I speak. But I've learned when something comes that I just give it the way it is. And I said, Ed, I'm sensing that God wants me to tell you, I'm not sure, but I'm sensing that he wants me to tell you that he sees you and that he approves of your ministry. Well, he began to bawl like a baby. He just began to weep uncontrollably. And I thought, oh boy, I did something wrong now. And I said, dude, what's going on? He said, JP, you have absolutely no idea what you just told me. And I said, well, that's typical of my teaching. But I said, what do you mean? He said, I have been struggling. And when I was sitting up there before the service started, I said to God, God, do you even see me? Do you approve of my ministry? And I had said those exact words to him when he was down there crying out to God for something that would encourage him. And the fact that it was just exactly what he had cried out to God for indicated that God gave me a word of knowledge for him that was edifying. And that's the purpose of a word of knowledge, is edification. And I could share with you 200 stories like that. Some much more dramatic, but we'll save some of those for tomorrow. The next two are, I started at 7:30, didn't I? Okay. Near-death experiences I'll say a word about those tomorrow. I'm going to talk primarily about healing, hearing God speak to you, and angels and demons. But I want to illustrate angels and demons and skip talking about near-death experiences. If you want to ask me a question about it, we can do that. And I might say something tomorrow. I want to tell you about my story. What I'm about to tell you is the truth. And nothing but the truth, and there are eyewitnesses that can confirm this story. Back in about the May of 2005, I went up to Seattle, Washington, and did a weekend series on defending the faith for a church. On Friday night, I spoke for about an hour. And after I was finished, a woman comes up to me and says, Dr. Moreland, thank you so much for your talk, but I feel like I need to tell you something. While you were speaking the entire 50 minutes, there were 3 angels surrounding you, guarding you. There was a real tall one behind you and 2 shorter ones on either side of you. And I thought you'd like to know that. Well, I thought the lady was sick. And I literally wanted to get away from her because, I mean, you never know. I mean, does she have a gun? I mean, I don't know. So I said, well, thank you very much, ma'am. I need to go get some refreshments. and I did. And I said to the pastor, who is that lady? And he said, she is probably the biggest disciple maker, apart from some of the staff women at the church here. And then I thought, well, she's not crazy, but maybe she just wants attention. I did not believe her. Okay, fast forward to the second week of September, that fall. School had started the last of August, and I was teaching a graduate seminar in metaphysics, in a classroom called Meyer 109. I was going through something really hard, and one night in bed, I did something that I'd never done in 35 years as a Christian. I said, Lord, I don't know if those angels are real or not. And if they were real, I have no idea if they're still here. But if they were real, would you send them back and would you let me know they're here? Because I need the encouragement. And so I said amen and went to sleep. About 4 days later, I get an email from a grad student named Mark Stepp, who sat over near the window on my left side, and the email says, JP, I have been wanting to send this to you for 3 days, but I've been scared to death that you'd think I was crazy. But I talked to a couple of the other students, and they said I had to send this to you. And so here goes. Look, if you want to talk about this, I'll come to your office. I saved the email, but 3 days or 4 days ago, when you were lecturing, all of a sudden I saw 3 angels that were standing around you. And they were there for about 20 minutes. And I rubbed my eyes. I thought, I'm seeing something. I just rubbed my eyes like heck, and they were still there. And I just thought, I'm telling you because I've been feeling guilty for not telling you. Well, I got on the phone and I said, get over here right now. He was working part-time in graduate student recruiting. So he comes over and I said, Mark, what the heck? I mean, was this in your head or were they in the room? And he said, oh no, they were in the room. There were robed figures. There was a tall one behind you and 2 shorter ones on either side of you. And I drew a picture of it. And I've got the picture to this day. He drew it in pencil. And I said, have you ever seen something like this, thinking maybe he just had hallucinations? And he said, I have never seen an angel in my life. This is the first time. Well, I said, well, why didn't you say something? He said, well, yeah, Dr. Moreland, before you go on about that, I thought I'd tell you there are 3 angels standing there. I was scared to share this with you 3 days after it happened. And I said, my gosh, well, listen, I told this story in Georgia about 4 years later to a group of Christian college students, and the leader of the group had been a grad student of mine who sat behind Mark. And he came up to me afterwards and said, JP, I remember the day that happened. I didn't know what was going on, but I sat behind Mark, and it was like the second week of school, over by the windows, and I was right behind him, and he started rubbing his eyes like he was going nuts. And I thought maybe he'd got acid in his eyes. And I said I was that close to getting up and taking him out to the men's room and washing his eyes out, but he stopped doing it. But I remember the day he did that, and now I know why he was doing it. Now, move forward, that's twice. I had another event happen later on campus where someone told me the same thing, but nobody knew about this. Now, I'm going to forget that one, but go to another one the next summer. That next spring semester, I got an email from a lawyer who was not a student who said, you don't know me, but I am going through a period of anxiety. I know you've had trouble with anxiety. Could I come and see you? And I said, of course you can. We scheduled an appointment in my office, and he came and saw me. And we talked. I tried to give him some wisdom on the thing and so on. I said, may I pray for you? He said, yes. I said, would you mind getting on your knees, and could I lay my hands on your head? And I did. And I prayed over him. And I spoke against the chemistry in his brain and commanded it to reorder. And he got up, and we hugged each other, and he left. And that was it. Well, fast forward now to July, and I get an email from this guy. And he said, JP, you're not going to remember me. Well, I did remember him. And I've got the email, by the way, for those of you who are skeptical. And he said, I have been sitting on something for about half a year, and I thought it was time I told you. When at the end of our meeting, you told me to get down on my knees, and I closed my eyes, and you put your hands on me and started praying, and I felt presences come in the room. And I opened my eyes, and Dr. Moreland, this is God's truth, I'm not crazy. I saw 3 angels that were standing around you, guarding you, while you were praying over me. And I said, have you ever heard about anything like this? He said, I didn't know what I was talking about because I didn't share it up until that point. Okay, 2 years ago, I was in Portland. This is the last thing. I was in Portland, Oregon, speaking at a conference. And I took a friend of mine from the church that's my age with me just to see what we do. I spoke that Saturday morning on the existence of God, and there was a 30-minute break. And I sat in the foyer. There was a bunch of book tables and ministries displaying their ministries, and you could get books at a good discount. So I sat behind our Talbot Biola book table, and there were 2 secretaries, both of them named Megan, that were there, knew them well, and my buddy Mark. And across the room comes this, I'd say mid to late 40s woman, and she comes up and says, Dr. Moreland, I wanted to thank you. I all my life have been a Jewish atheist. And over 12 months ago, I gave my life to Jesus Christ, and there's a specific book you wrote that was really, really helpful to me, and I wanted to thank you for that. Well, I was so flattered. I said, thank you, dear sister. Good to have you in the family. But she said, that's not why I came over here. She said, I'm just going to be really honest with you. When you were speaking this morning, and I said, stop. Okay, please. I said to the Megans, I want you to listen to this. Mark, I want you listening. So they all listened, and I said, I'd like to ask you questions, don't keep going. Did you see angels when I was speaking? And she said, how did you know that? I said, I'm asking the questions. I said, did you happen to notice a number? You know, were there 5 or 6 or yeah, there were 3 of them. Okay, were they big or small or Or, well, did you notice it? Yeah, there was one really tall dude, and she used the word dude, behind you, and two short ones oh, no, she said there was a tall one and two short ones. And I said, one more question. Were they on the floor down below the stage? Were they floating up above? Where were they? She said they were standing around you, two on either side and one behind you. Now, folks, that's 5 eyewitness testimonies that saw the same thing and didn't know about anybody else, because this was not public knowledge. It is beyond reasonable doubt that those angels were staying with me. I don't know if they're still here. I don't think I've done anything to get rid of them. But we'll talk about angels tomorrow, and I'll say a word about this. Now, I'm going to close with the following. I've given you 5 kinds of miracles, specific answers to prayer. I will talk about that in a minute after a break. Healing, hearing God speak, angels and demons tomorrow in our time, and then near-death experiences, which we won't mention. Now, I want to say that in the book that I brought, I give 14 reasons why God doesn't heal the sick and why he doesn't answer our prayers. Because I am not saying that we should count on this as our only way of coping with our hardships. No. Yes, I think the American church has lowered its expectations and we're practical naturalists. We don't really believe that God does things anymore. And I want to try to encourage us to have reason to increase our expectation. Because you can't just choose to have more faith. It doesn't work. But you can do certain things that will help you increase your faith. And I'll talk about that tomorrow. But I want you to know that besides God's intervention, there's also trusting in his providence that if he allowed this to happen to you and doesn't respond to your prayers for help, there are at least 14 reasons in his mind for why he does that sort of thing, and they're good ones. And so we count on both of these. It's not just about having God intervene, although I want to see more of that, don't you? But it's also about learning to deal with things when we're disappointed with God and learning how to grow through that. Let's take about a 10 or 15 minute break, and let's then be back, and we'll do a little thing on prayer, and then we'll finish for the